Hi, this is Ruth McCambridge from the Nonprofit Quarterly, and I am so glad to welcome you to today's webinar with Simone Joyaux. And the webinar today is called Principled Fundraising, and as you will soon find, it is a conversation. It's not a how-to. It's not a how-to set of slides. It's more of a conversation about the issues of principles and ethics that you run into when you're doing fundraising for nonprofits. So I want to say before we start today that today's webinar is sponsored by Eventbrite. And Eventbrite is a global event marketplace that empowers people to easily discover and create events. Over 75,000 nonprofit events have been ticketed through the Eventbrite platform. You can find free resources from Eventbrite at www.eventbrite.com/academy. You'll find sponsorship guides, social media, best practices, tips from other experts in the nonprofit industry, and much more. I think you'll find it's a very interesting platform, and please be sure to visit their link. This is the first of a number of webinars that we're going to run for people that is really based on your own questions about your practice. It is very important that for Nonprofit Quarterly to understand what it is you have questions about and not just talk at you, but talk with you about how to approach those things. So as many of you know, we asked you at the point that you registered for the webinar if you would provide your questions for us. And so we have integrated that into our thinking as we've developed this. But also people should know that you can easily log in your questions during the webinar in the questions area on the control panel. And you can do that really at any time, and we'll address them in the question and answer session portion of this, but also probably all through the webinar as things come up that we think are interesting and important for us to address. Just to start out, I do want to say that there's really, in my experience, as somebody who is a very reluctant fundraiser over many decades, there's no way to divorce fundraising from questions of principle, large and small. There's constant evidence of this in the news, and you know, you can look at some of the outright scandals and scams that happen in the news. Those really aren't what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today are the decisions that are made by fundraisers in the course of their work that feel uncomfortable to them, that are either unethical or they divert from the principle and the mission of the organization in some way. And those are uncomfortable moments that almost all of us as fundraisers have been in over time. One of the issues right now in the news, as people may have noticed, is with the Red Cross. And Red Cross has had problems before in its communications with donors and what donors see as being its responsibility to them, its accountability to them. Currently, they're in the news for their spending or lack thereof in Haiti, and questions that have emerged about that. And because they're congressionally chartered institutions, those is incredibly exercised about at this moment is that you know, he feels that that contract has been broken with donors in the United States, and he wants that to change. He wants Red Cross to be more transparent. So your fundraising conundrums are probably not as flashy as the Red Cross. They're certainly not as high profile, likely, but they, as we said, they are uncomfortable when they occur. And so we're going to try to address them in this session. So I want to introduce now Simone Joyaux, who is, she writes the very popular Unraveling Development column for a nonprofit quarterly. She's got a following all of her own, people who pay attention to everything she says, and she really talks internationally on development. She did want me to do a caveat, a kind of a user's warning today, to say she is very passionate about what she believes. And so if she gets started on being passionate, understand that's what you signed up for. It's what makes her as powerful a voice in development as she is, because she feels very strongly about how to do this work and how to actually have it fit properly in what she most cares about, which is social justice work. So I want to start by asking Simone to talk a little bit, because I've heard you say this many, many times, Simone, that in fact a lot of people don't understand that there is a body of knowledge and some guidance out there for people on the general ethical, the general ethical guidelines around fundraising. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so one of the things that I think is very important for people to distinguish between is the concept of a body of knowledge. That's one piece. Personal opinion, which is another piece, and professional opinion from people who actually know the body of knowledge. So right now I'm not talking about ethics necessarily. I'm talking about the fact that there are good principles, effective principles, in how to raise charitable contributions. And one of the biggest problems I see in the sector is that we have these wonderful, powerful, sometimes board members who keep saying, well, this is the way to do it because I've done it so much. One of my favorite stories, Ruth, is a gentleman who said to me one day, and this was at a board workshop, and I was talking about best practice in fundraising, body of knowledge. I made some statement, he reached over, patted me on the arm and said, well, Missy, I have served on more boards than you are old. And I said, very professionally and calmly, but I'm right and you're wrong. Because I actually had the IRS handout in my hand. This happens far too much, that there's this business about my opinion, my opinion. So competent fundraisers and competent effective organizations distinguish between and learn the body of knowledge. And we're not doing quite enough of that these days. So there's that. Then the next piece, I think, relative to this webinar is we keep confusing ethics with body of knowledge principles. It's not unethical to do what is called street fundraising or face-to-face fundraising, where nicely dressed younger people are standing on the street interacting with people to ask for contributions. That's not unethical. In Australia, it raises $9 billion a year. And in fact, it is also considered good fundraising practice if you know how to do it correctly. The thing about ethics is, and I once asked someone this, I said, so what's unethical? I'm not talking about illegal, because what's illegal is unethical. So some of the scams that go on, that's not bad fundraising, that's illegal people doing illegal stuff. But someone once said to me, well, maybe ethics is, could you stand to see that printed in the newspaper? Is that ethical or unethical? Could you look your mother in the face? Ethical or unethical? We do have codes of ethics in fundraising, every professional association of fundraisers worldwide has an ethical code. And there's actually now a code that's much more international that was brought together by various fundraising professional associations all over the world. So we have to be very careful what we accuse or say as being unethical versus it's just not good fundraising. We also have to be very careful that we're not saying that's unethical because somebody doesn't like that fundraising strategy, because that's equally bad. So it's one of those things that you have to really carefully weigh. Anything that's illegal is also unethical.
Mm-hmm.
So those would be my introductory remarks.
Well, you know, let's take off for a minute on where you started with that, because you started talking about so-called chuggers or street fundraisers, right? People who they might be called canvassers.
Yeah.
But so getting into some of the ways in which ethics comes into a situation like that. When I actually was involved in a canvassing operation in the unlikely field of domestic violence, which was, I'm not sure, that great of an idea to send people out house to house talking to people about domestic violence, but we did it. And it actually raised quite a bit of money. But in order to make it work with our ratios to report it out properly, we wrote off a big cost of that fundraising effort to public education. So it's in those situations where we really see ethics and principles kind of raised up in the doing of this. Is there something that takes us down a road that makes us uncomfortable? Because it certainly made me uncomfortable. I wasn't ever sure how much of what they did could qualify as public education, and how much of it could qualify as simple fundraising. We were certainly doing it primarily for a fundraising intent. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how something is done, come out and give us a couple of other examples of that.
Yeah. So first, can you hear me? Because there's been some really weird sounds going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so first, when you ask for a charitable gift, okay, that's fundraising. Hello, Ruth. Because you're so interested in this, I was wondering if you might consider a gift. That's fundraising. One of the things that has been freaking people out, and this is partially because of a bunch of silly watchdogs who don't know anything, it can cost a lot more money to acquire a new donor than it does to keep one. If you acquire enough new donors and then you can keep them, it doesn't matter how much it costs to acquire them. It doesn't matter. So yes, if you're doing, for example, what is called face-to-face or street fundraising, you are not going door to door usually. You're intersecting people who are walking on the street, downtown, in the mall, whatever, and you are approaching them and asking if you can speak with them. And if they say no, you don't chase them. You don't badger them. And if it costs, I don't care, $5 to raise $1, that's fine. As long as you can keep them. Does that make sense? Is anyone there?
You know something, Simone? We lost your sound for a minute.
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the fact is, it's about acquiring, and most importantly, it's about keeping donors. So the people who are writing articles, the watchdogs that are sending all these messages about it's bad to give to a charity that has fundraising costs, That's just crap. It costs money to raise money, just like it costs money to manufacture an iPhone and then buy it. The key is to keep them. And fundraising has a bad tendency not to work very hard at keeping donors.
Right.
That's not unethical. It's just stupid. It's bad business. Okay? But it's not unethical. So, something like, as I say, street fundraising or direct mail or telephone. Again, you don't badger people, but you do reach out and you do talk. And if they say, no, really, I'm not interested, you confirm that they're not interested and you hang up or you go away. So one of the very bad things we have going on is a bunch of silly watchdogs, silly board members, and crazy media who are making a scene about the cost to raise $1 when acquisition is always going to cost more. Any business it does, and this is a business.
Right. Well, and I'm going to push back a little bit. Of course, Simone and I have these conversations all the time, and I'm going to push back a little bit on this because some of what we've seen emerge as scandals, and you're going to say those were scams from the beginning, are things like are entities that have used telemarketers to raise millions of dollars for people that never saw that money. And the justification for that has been, well, it costs money to acquire those donors. And in fact, they never move on from the acquisition of those donors to a regular program. And so they're constantly acquiring donors or acting as if they're acquiring donors, even if they're calling back the same people over and over again. And they're spending the large majority of their money on the fundraising operation itself.
And if that
does that wander into an ethical problem?
So if that's a nonprofit organization, okay, if it's a nonprofit organization that is paying all that money and never tries to keep the donors, then I want to know where the board of directors of that nonprofit are. Because that's bad accountability, it's bad business, whether it's unethical or not, which I certainly have problems with it. I want to know where the board is, I want to know where the CEO is, and I want to know why they're not talking about that.
Right.
So it's bad business, as I say. To me, it is unethical. But whether everybody agrees that it's unethical or not, again, it doesn't matter. I want to know where the board is. I want to know where that CEO is. I want to know what level of competence they have.
It's one of those slippery slopes for some organizations that that people end up wondering about is how much should it cost to raise $1? And maybe you can talk a little bit about the difference in cost between raising a dollar from a new person and $1 from somebody who's already with you.
So it is estimated to cost 10 times more money to acquire a new donor than it is to keep a current one. What's really interesting is to ask what the average donor retention rates are in the United States. They're like 49%, 44%. 44% are donor retention rates. If any business, like the local bakery or grocery store or bank, only retained 44% of their customers, they'd close. So I want to know what the development office is thinking, I want to know what the CEO is thinking, and I want to know where the board members' heads are. Because that's bad business. It's bad management. So boards should be looking at retention rates.
It's interesting because most boards probably are not looking at retention rates. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I would say that the reason why boards are not necessarily as effective as they should be is because the CEO isn't trying to help them be as effective as they are, because X% of CEOs don't know what good governance is. So it all keeps circling back. You have, well, Missy, I've served on more boards than you are old. That's like, that doesn't mean you know anything. You have people acting as if there is no body of knowledge and documented body of knowledge in fundraising. And there is, and it's growing and growing. You have bosses telling their development staff, I don't like that letter, when it's the right letter and was written according to best practice. You have board chairs who say to their CEOs and development staff, I don't want to do this that way because in my opinion this is the wrong way, but that board chair is wrong. So we're not accepted as having a body of knowledge. We're not treated like a profession in fundraising. We have this, we think that rich people or people on our boards know about governance, and they don't, and that's not their failing. That's why you have staff, professional staff. So a lot of the stuff that's going wrong or is not done well is because of this whole business about there's no knowledge, there's no best practice, blah, 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 and very weak accountability on the part of boards.
Okay, now I've got a couple of questions that are coming right out of what you're talking about, so I'm going to ask you to just respond first to, people are asking what is an acceptable retention rate?
So, right, I've actually not seen research that actually says what's acceptable, but I would start by asking your board members in their businesses what's acceptable. And if you figure that X% of people die or relocate, you could say relocate permanently, or, that which would be the death thing, or relocate someplace else, then, you're going to always lose a portion of your database.
Mm-hmm.
So,
go ahead.
I'm looking at, now again, I have not seen research that says what should be ideal, but I can't see how you could feel proud if it wasn't at least 75%, if not more.
Okay. And again, the length of time that somebody's been with you, their repeated giving behavior, all of that factors in. And do you know, Simone, do you know if the retention rates online are significantly different against face-to-face versus direct mail, for instance, or?
Okay, so first of all, one other thing we don't distinguish between is, did you mean I paid it online, Ruth? Or did you mean I was acquired and solicited online? So those are two vastly different things. Direct mail is not dead. Direct mail in print is still the driving force. Whether I paid it online or whether or if I paid it by check. So all this fantasy about social media and Facebook and all this stuff raising more money. So if you want really good research on that sort of thing, the Agitator reports very regularly on it, and that's an online e-news. There's some interesting things. You should always look at SOFII, S-O-F-I-I, which is the Showcase of Fundraising Innovation and Inspiration, because they'll be talking about those sorts of things. But you should be, as an organization, all of you out there, you should be finding out whether people are paying it online, but in response to direct mail, print direct mail, paper. All of the research, as a matter of fact, tells people we like the sensory touching of paper. Direct mail is not dead. Retention rates for street fundraising, which is called face-to-face fundraising everywhere in the world, but in the United States, the retention rates are very low. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean if you didn't work hard to retain, you couldn't. So no one is going to stay a donor if you don't nurture the relationship. Mm-hmm. And the kinds of relationship nurturing that's going on ain't necessarily that good. You don't just keep soliciting. You have a newsletter, a donor newsletter. You have activities that people can participate in. You have all sorts of stuff. Otherwise, we don't retain them.
Right. It makes perfect sense. Somebody's asking a question, and it's an interesting question, and I think this fits in a category you talked about earlier. The question is, I'm going to read it right out. What about donor fatigue? Is there a reasonable expectation that donors will move on at some, I knew you were going to do that. Will move on at some point. Is the retention measure YOY or some longer term?
Okay, so I do not believe in donor fatigue. That was why I was going like that.
I knew that.
I do not believe in donor fatigue. I think what donors are fatigued about is receiving solicitations from organizations that they haven't responded to and don't care about. I think that the myth of donor fatigue, like, oh, we get tired, is crap. So, one of the questions one always has to ask is, first of all, for one's current donors, how much is too much soliciting? We don't know for sure. There's been some research experience, actual applied experience, where you could certainly solicit them once. You could certainly solicit them once a month, right? So we don't also know necessarily how long anyone is going to stay loyal, even if they're, it's a very good relationship building. So we know that the World War II generation, research says, was much more loyal. We know baby boomers are more loyal. We know apparently that millennials are not particularly loyal, and I don't remember anything I've heard about Gen X. So loyalty is not as loyal as it was in whatever the olden days were. That said, I've not seen a lot of organizations that do terribly good relationship building. So until you're really doing good relationship building, I wouldn't worry about whether they're going to be loyal or not. And again, I want to go back to donors.
It's kind of like blaming the victim.
Exactly. It is. It's very good. You're not loyal. Well, I never heard from you. How could I be loyal? You didn't tell me how you spent my money. You didn't tell me that what I did was good. But the other thing, again, is this whole business of donor fatigue. It's like, I would maintain that the people who are really fatigued is, why haven't you stopped soliciting me since I didn't respond multiple times?
Right. Right. Can you, and this was something that I was going to ask you, but there's a participant asking it. Can you give us some examples of good relationship building activities? Like, it would be nice just to hear about a particular organization. You don't have to name names, but some a set of relationship building activities that you have observed that really not only seem to work, but seem to be the right thing to do.
Okay, so the first thing is the prompt official thank you letter, which needs to go out within 48 hours. That's the first thing. And that, I don't even consider that relationship building. I consider that an accountability obligation. Donor thank you calls by board members. All they're doing is calling and saying thank you. They are not asking for another gift.
Right.
The most important thing is the donor-centered newsletter. The vast majority of newsletters are not donor-centered. They don't know anything about donor-centered communications. They keep talking about how good our organization is, and that's not donor-centered.
Right.
So you want to see really good stuff about donor-centered newsletters and that sort of thing. You want to look at Tom Ahern's work. You want to look at Jeff Brooks's work. These people all have free newsletters and robust websites. There's no excuse for not knowing about writing in a donor-centered manner and doing a donor-centered newsletter. So all of that's out there. Sometimes board members will write extra thank you notes, handwritten thank you notes. Again, that's the same thing as the thank you call. It's coming from a volunteer, someone who isn't doing this as a job. You want to use all existing programs, fundraising events, wherever people gather, where donors may gather. And I always like to say, if you're a board member, you don't bring a date. If you're a staff member, you don't bring a date to these programs or to these events, because your job is to mingle and schmooze with the guests who are there, some of whom may become donors, some of whom are already donors, and you go up and you introduce yourself and you ask them why they're there. This is always centered on the other person, the donor, not your organization. You're not showing a mini PowerPoint about how swell you are. You can do special update letters in addition to donor newsletters. You can invite donors to come and see a program. I mean, think about all of the organizations that are serving youngsters or even teens, and you say, you know, we're just inviting 5 of you donors over to observe this program, right? I had a colleague say to me once, she worked with a refugee program. They would invite a donor to go with them to the airport to greet a family coming in, just to say hello. And if there was a child coming in, the donor would be given the teddy bear to give to the child. Could you imagine what that must have felt like as a donor? To be part of the team? We're not, you know, relationship building is not like we have to have these big extravaganzas with hundreds of people there. One of the things zoos have been doing for a number of years, which I find fascinating, is they invite a handful of donors, you know, 3, to come and help feed the animals. My theory with that is that the lawyers must be having a fit with potential litigation. But, you know, you come in, help us feed the lion. No, we're not going to put you in the cage with the lion.
Well, do they actually have to feed the lion? And it seems like lions are maybe more endangered by us than we are by them right now.
Right, right. So there's all kinds of things. I was once, you know, one of the best ways to come up with some of these activities is to do brainstorming and conversation with your staff colleagues. I remember one time, one of the staff in an organization I was working with said, well, we could invite donors to come to one of our program committee meetings. The other staff, their eyes got huge and they went, oh my God, no, that would be like watching how the sausage is made. But the staff person who suggested it said, well, yes, maybe some of our donors should see how the sausage is made so that they know how hard a work this is.
Right.
I mean, isn't that cool? And, you know, my website has tons of ideas and there are all sorts of books out there that have ideas about how to nurture relationships. This is not hard. What's hard is carving out the time to do it. And I will say that one of the things I've said to people is, you would never do, I've never met an organization who would do their program in a kind of a half, you know, not such a great manner, really. Because if they weren't doing it great, they would choose to close because they believe so deeply in their mission. It's about time that we start treating governance and fundraising that way. Because if they're, you know, here, curiously enough, I think is kind of an ethical dilemma. We decide to commit to the mission. We are assiduous. We are strong. We will not do our mission poorly, right? We are really committed to this. But we'll do fundraising and we'll do governance in a half-assed manner, pardon me, because somehow it's not as important. I kind of think that's an ethical dilemma.
Right. Let's move a little bit here and talk a little bit about mismatches between donors and organizations. I think in particular we can talk about corporate mismatches, but can you talk a little bit about I just got a comment that governance and fundraising should be fully asked, not half-assed. So,
yes, thank you.
Can you talk about the danger in those mismatches between corporate sponsors, large donors, and organizations whose missions may be endangered by the receiving of a gift? And talk about, you know, situations that you've seen and what it was that people had to do to, you know, fully face it.
So what's interesting is if we step back a moment and say, The concept of charitable giving, all right? And I'm thinking primarily at this moment of individuals, since that is where 80 to 85% of all charitable gifts in the United States come from, individuals. When I give a gift, when any individual gives a gift, they are fulfilling their own aspirations by giving through your organization. They're not giving to your organization to do something. They're fulfilling their own beliefs, their own values. I would suggest that corporations are doing the same thing in many ways. Their aspirations may not be the same, but they may be saying, we want to associate with this very well-run, well-known charity because we want to, for whatever reason. So then the charity has to turn around and say, do we want to be associated with that individual, right? Or that corporation, or that foundation for that matter, or that government agency. And it's not like the anonymity of a donor. It's not like we can necessarily keep this kind of thing secret. So are we looking for gifts from people, businesses, government departments, whatever, that are aligned with our values, or are we just looking for money? So, a very interesting question always is, what are our gift acceptance policies? What is it that we will or won't accept? Now, this to me in some ways is obviously ethics. In other ways, one can justify. The most important thing is you should be talking about this before the issue ever arises. So, for example, if you're the American Lung Association or the American Cancer Association, would you accept a gift from RJR Nabisco? Mm-hmm. Now, many of us might remember Nabisco like they're the little vanilla wafers and things like that. But RJR stands for what? Reynolds Tobacco Company. Do you, as the Cancer Association or the Lung Association, want to be associated with, and do you want to accept money from the tobacco industry? An industry that intentionally addicted people. So to me, there's a difference between intentionally addicting people and lying about it and an oil spill. On the other hand, an oil spill by a company that is notorious for always being very poor in safety makes me wonder about the beliefs of the board. Do I want to be associated with a board who actually accepts the fact that its institution is one of the weakest in security and safety? Do I want to align with that? So these are the kinds of philosophical, principled, ethical questions that boards should be talking about. Do I want to accept, do I, as Susan B. Komen, want to co-brand with arms manufacturers so that there are little pistols for women with pink ribbons on them? Do I want to associate, since I'm talking about cancer, with a food product that may not be very healthy? It's not cancer producing, but it's not very healthy. Those are the conversations we have to have. And again, boards have to talk about that before it ever arises. There's a joke in, semi-joke, whatever, in fundraising, which is you want to be very careful about having, we want to be very careful about naming a building after someone while they're still alive, because maybe they'll do something dumb and you don't want to be associated with it.
Or they already did and it just hasn't come to light yet.
Right, exactly. So, life would be wonderful if, I'm joking on some level, but life would be simpler if there was absolutely a very clear right or wrong in every single situation. And then we could just say, well, so we never do anything wrong. What happens when two of your values are in conflict? They're both equally important values, but you have to talk about them and decide. So to me, these are conversations that are not necessarily had probably very often, or they're had once Nobody remembers, and we're not actually trying to play it out. What are the questions would we ask? Which one wouldn't we accept? Well, maybe we would accept it. Why? What are the determining factors? How will we look on the front page of the newspaper? And on and on and on.
Right. That how will we look on the front page of the newspaper is an important one, because more and more often you are going to end up on the front page of the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question here about the difference between how to manage the difference between organizational values and the values of board members who have strong opinions. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we all know this. So.
Okay. All right, so wait a second. This is actually very easy. The organization articulates its values. When I say the organization, I mean there's staff and board together, and they articulate the organization's values. And then nobody is hired and nobody joins the board who doesn't subscribe to those values. And I generally do the values clarification piece, which is described in detail in one of my books. I generally do the values clarification piece every 3 years or so when we're doing strategic planning. So you don't get to be on a board unless you subscribe to the organization's values. I didn't say the staff's values. I said the staff and board come together and we are creating values. And you don't get hired and you don't join the board unless you subscribe to those values. They are one of the screening devices. It's very, very easy, actually. Very easy.
Somebody is posing the situation, which I know that this is a place that a lot of development directors find themselves in. What if they do not have the final say in an ethical decision, and the decision has been made by the board and the organization, and they kind of are directed to walk it out?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, right. So first of all, if we're talking about ethics and fundraising, the development director is, of course, in the room when the conversation's happening.
We hope.
Well, if you're not, then you got to figure out why you aren't being invited, and then you may want to think about another job. Now, one of the things to just step back, I work very hard with clients and organizations to make sure that they adopt the Donor Bill of Rights and the AFP Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice sometime during the consultancy, because those then shape decisions. If the values, okay, so if we're talking legal or illegal, I'm assuming we all know what the choice is. Leave and tell them it's illegal, whatever they're doing. And you may want to think about whistleblowing, but I'm not saying you have to. But the other thing is values. So one of the things that I believe each of us as a human being has to do, and each of us as a professional has to do, is we have to define our own values.
Right.
And
so important. I think you could say that over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. What are the values by which you want to be known, and please don't sell them.
Right. So again, I do distinguish between the values as an individual, and some of these things link over, but a whole lot of the values, say in the AFP code, are about doing the business of fundraising, and so they would link with your personal values in many ways, but they are about doing the business of fundraising. And if the organization is violating those codes, is violating those values, if they adopted them in the first place, they can't violate them, or they have to really talk about it. If you're an AFP member and you signed that code, you have to leave. You can't allow that to happen. So I have left organizations, boards. I have refused to work with organizations where my where my professional values were in conflict. I just wouldn't stay. So a fascinating conversation. See, the other thing that goes on here is we don't seem to think about how to have a conversation with our board. What we have is we have guidelines and we listen to reports and we vote. imagine taking in the Donor Bill of Rights, the International Fundraising Code, the AFP Code, and having a conversation at the board meeting. Pull out one of the elements and say, so what does this mean to everybody? Let's take examples of how to play it out, so that we're building understanding about the values, or in this case, codes, which are codes of ethical principles.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. So I want to get to this question because it's actually been posed by two different people, and with your two different examples.
Right.
Two different people said, but don't you need to inform the refugee family before you bring a donor along? And the other one said, but in a zoo situation, how do you guard against being so donor-centric that you would potentially put the animals at risk? And I think what both of them are getting at is, how do you manage that, the kind of what you're always told, which is to be donor-centric, against what you must do, which is to be mission-centric and really focused on the needs of the beneficiaries first and foremost.
Okay, so how come these are in conflict? They're not. You can be donor-centered as well as mission-centered. Of course you can. And nobody who is a true professional would ever do something against the mission in order to be donor-centered. That just doesn't make sense. To me, this is a false conflict and a false dichotomy. If someone comes to you and you're the zoo and says, I will give you $500,000 to build a swimming pool because I think the staff should have a swimming pool, or because I think that all the animals want a swimming pool, then the zoo explains that, wow, cool, but we don't need a swimming pool. It's not in our strategic plan. It actually doesn't work for animals. But let me share with you.
Some animals might like it.
I'm thinking they want ponds, not swimming pools.
Okay.
And then you say, let me share with you the way you could make a difference here, blah, 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 blah. And the person says, no, I want to build a swimming pool. And then a truly ethical fundraiser says, you should talk with the Y or the Boys and Girls Club or something like that, because they may well love this idea and want to share it with you. That's what you do. And really, do you actually think any zoo could be so stupid as to bring donors to help feed the animals and let them hurt the animals? Come on. Donor-centered
So
never...
you don't go for this dichotomy.
There is no dichotomy.
Okay.
You don't accept the gift. Whatever.
Somebody is mentioning that maybe we could just get rid of boards. I'm just bringing it up.
So, one of my oldest and dearest and most traumatic memories is in about 79, let's say. I was many years younger. Came back from a fairly typical board meeting where I was the executive director of a small organization in Michigan, where I grew up. Came back from a typical board meeting, sat down behind my desk in the corner, rocking back and forth, sobbing and retching because I was crying so hard. And two of my staff colleagues came in and kind of said, well, there she goes again. So I can understand wanting to get rid of boards, but it's not possible. We are required by law to have them, but much more importantly, if you've got a good board, there's nothing quite like it. What I learned, crouched behind my desk, rocking and retching, was to look in the mirror, because chances are the problem with the board was my problem, because I didn't understand governance and I didn't know how to enable and facilitate people to do the right stuff before they started going down the wrong paths. So, I believe in good boards. I am disappointed at the mediocrity and dysfunctionality that I see. And in almost every case, I can point at the executive director first and continuously. So when the world ends for your organization and life is absolutely awful, you're going to be thrilled to have a board with board members who will gear up and help and with whom you can speak. If you're doing fundraising well, you will have board members going and making telephone calls to thank donors and going with you to partner and even going without you to ask for gifts. And if you've got a good board, and I want to stress, you're the one who helps make it good, whether you're the exec or the development officer, and certainly hopefully both, they will have interesting conversations about what's happening in the world. They'll have conversations about whether we should accept the gift or not, and we'll all work it out.
Right.
So look in the mirror first. I say that as someone who had to.
I still often have to, but I love my board.
Right.
I'm going to say that. But okay, I want to ask just more generally about the danger of large gifts. You did mention inappropriate gifts such as swimming pools, but
Right.
if somebody wants to give me a swimming pool, that's great. But if somebody offers you a lot of money, it is your angel donor, they come to you, they say, I want to give you $2 million and your budget is $500,000 a year. What is it that you immediately have to run through in your mind?
In no priority order, I want to know what the donor expects done with that money, because it may not be what needs to be done, and we don't want it. I want to know what sorts of role the donor thinks he or she is going to play in the gifting of that gift. Oh, gee, I'm going to serve on the committee you weren't going to have. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I want to know if that amount of money is too big for us and we couldn't sustain it later. Because there's no way we could figure out how to raise $2 million in addition every year or whatever. So I want to really know what the stress factors would be and how all of that would be managed. Yeah. So there's a lot of questions to ask.
Right. I think a lot of people, we have a wonderful article that is called Gift Horse or Trojan Horse.
Yes, very nice.
It's a great article. Anybody who wants to go look at the dangers of large gifts, that is the classic on the issue, because it is very easy to go wrong in accepting a large gift, much as it pains me to say so.
The other angle about that is the nature of your tax status that happens if one person is putting that much money in. So that's something you got to look at and talk about with an accountant and a lawyer to know if that changes your tax status and you become a foundation or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to think about.
I want to ask you one question, which I know you don't necessarily want to answer, but you're going to have to. Okay. This is the one question that comes up every time we bring up ethics and fundraising, and you know what it is, so I don't even need to mention it to you. Go for it.
Oh,
you
okay. Yeah, you should mention it. Just to make sure.
Here's the question that comes up. It's the only thing that people know that there is a guideline about, which is how come I, as a contractor, cannot write a grant on consignment, a grant request where I get a portion of the take, so to speak, instead of getting paid for grant writing itself. So maybe you can talk about what the answer to that question is.
So commission-based compensation, in other words. So So just as an aside, one of the things you should all go look at is you should go to the AFP website, look at the AFP code, and then look at the guidelines and interpretation thereof, because it'll help explain this. But here are assorted reasons. Has anybody ever had a telephone call from a salesperson? You know, they're selling something on, via telephone, and you had to fight to get off the call. You know, they were trying to sell you, I don't know, weekly cookies, Ruth, and you kept saying, nah, I'm not really interested, and they kept pushing. But wait, there aren't any calories, and then you could do this. Right? I mean, I'm assuming everyone has experienced this, the hard sell. It's like the car salesperson. Wait, as you're walking out the door, come back, all right? So they're working on commission. It's the pressure piece. That is one of the biggest issues, the pressure angle. My compensation is dependent on how many sponsors I get for the fundraising event and blah, 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 blah. So there's all of that pressure. Second, let's say that you've hired me, so you have hired me, Ruth, Nonprofit Quarterly, to help you do some personal face-to-face major gift fundraising, and I'm going to be paid on commission. You have been working with the Smiths. Remember the Smiths? Bob and Tom Smith, whatever. You've been working with them for ages, cultivating the relationship. They're almost ready to be asked. You assign me to go ask them, and I get the gift, and I get a % of that. You're the one that nurtured the relationship. I had nothing to do with it. I just happened to have asked at that moment. They were already ready. Third, people deserve to be paid for their work. Okay? I'm a very good fundraising consultant. I write grants. I'm a very good fundraiser. I'm sitting here telling you that it's a bad idea to write a grant to that foundation, because in my research it indicates that they're not going to be interested, blah, 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 blah. You insist that I do it, and I'm going to be paid on commission, and I wrote it because you demanded it. Maybe you're my boss, whatever, and you didn't get the grant. I did a damn good job. I even told you shouldn't be applying, and now I'm not getting paid.
So there are multiple reasons here.
Absolutely multiple reasons.
Not a good idea. Okay, so I noticed that we're at 1:59. This has gone by very fast, Simone, as I knew it would. But we do have so many requests from people about getting more information about the body of knowledge that's out there to guide people. And so I guess I don't know whether you want to talk about that now or whether we want to send something to people that would give them a set of websites. It's kind of up to you.
Okay, so I'm going to just start reciting things, people, so start writing. Okay, so first, and this is not in any particular order, but if you go to my website, SimoneJoyaux.com, I blog weekly and I have a free monthly newsletter, and both of those things include places to go for other information as well as tips. So for example, if you went to my weekly blog and pulled up the archives, you would see a whole section, one whole section called resources and another whole section called research, and then you would just have a bunch of other blogs with content. You should and my newsletters and blogs are always telling you people you should be subscribing to. For the best single book, probably, on an overview of fundraising, it's called Fundraising Principles and Practice. It is written by Adrian Sargent, S-A-R-G-E-A-N-T, and Jen Shang, S-H-A-N-G. For all things about donor-centered communications, one of the world's leading experts is a guy named Tom Ahern, A-H-E-R-N. He's all over the internet. And to subscribe to my own ethics, I must tell you that he is also my life partner. However, he's still one of the world's leading experts. And I'm the one who got it.
Opinion.
Oh no, not in my opinion. As a matter of fact, Ruth, not in my opinion at all.
No, I was saying
all
it's a
the
totally
lists.
unbiased opinion. Yeah.
Right. In all the lists and everything else. Let's see. The first book, Ken Burnett, B-U-R-N-E-T-T, from the UK, is the one who wrote the first book on relationship fundraising. A very good piece. He's still blogging, and he's the one who put together SOFII, SOFII.org, the Showcase of Fundraising Innovation and Inspiration, which shows some of the best fundraising pieces, actual solicitation letters, etc., over the past, I don't know, 35, 50 years, something like that. You can go to CFRE International and you can look at their book list. So that will give you other ideas.
Okay, now Simone, I'm going to stop you there. You and I are going to have to put together a list and send it to people, which is being asked for by our participants. Or maybe we can actually have you write a column on it. One of your columns on it, where to go to find the body of knowledge on these issues. And we're over time, so I want to say, Simone, this has been so much fun. It's just been wonderful to talk to you and see you. Actually, I don't get to see you that much, and we will, as people can tell, these BYOQ sessions are going to have their own little culture. They're really going to be driven by the questions of the participants. They're going to be very informal and responsive to you. Well, the point is to bring you experts who are so quick on their feet and so steeped in the knowledge that they can pretty much answer the questions that you have. So I want to thank you all for coming. This has been wonderful and a great foray for us and hopefully for you as well. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.